Okay, so it's Saturday night, and it's still close to the time of Ajahn Chah's birthday, so I thought I would just speak a bit about Ajahn Chah. Certainly for me, he was my primary teacher and kind of the basis of my inspiration, commitment to the practice. And one of the things that comes to mind thinking about Ajahn Chah, especially just thinking about how hot it was, has been the past few days, will be tomorrow. I mean, it was 104, 105 today. And Ajahn Chah was not somebody that you can go to complain about anything to. So it was he'd turn it right back on you in that sense of if it's hot, you practice with the heat. If it's cold, you practice with the cold. And it's just you take the conditions that you're living in, so you work with the hand that's dealt to you, and that is because the Dhamma is appropriate for everything, and from time to time he would have us in the hot season put our robes on after the meal when it's already hot and it's after the meal and you're not looking to you're looking for a bit of a break, and then he would lead us in a sit in the hall, and not an air-conditioned hall, I guess. This sort of tin roof, and in Wadapong, which is really hot. So after and you never knew how long it was going to go, because it was never. He would never sort of make a kind of an announcement. And that was one of the things, you never ever knew how long anything was going to take. You never knew when it would end or when it would change. Things would just be announced, and then you start to roll with it. And similarly, in the cold season, sometimes he'd have morning puja before alms round. Have people take off their robes and just sit with these little flimsy, they call them anksas, it's kind of thing, yeah, and kind of chest covering, and sit meditation when it's cold, and say, what's it like? And recognizing that within, whether it's hot or cold, you can still be mindful and aware. You can still be peaceful and not creating suffering, and that's the because we are, and that would often be Ajahn Chah's. Are you suffering? That's because that's we tend to do that. Whether it's, we suffer because it's hot, and we suffer because it's cold. We suffer because we've got too much of something. We suffer because we've got too little, and we make everything an opportunity for suffering, and that's Ajahn Chah's sort of constant reminder is that, this is where the root of suffering is in the mind that is reacting out of desire, reacting out of preference, reacting out of mood, and there's where the suffering is. Sadhu. Another time he compared everyone in the human condition as we're all in a cage. We're in the cage of birth, aging, sickness, and death, and as comfortable as we make that cage, it's still in the cage. As uncomfortable and cramped the cage might be, it's still in the cage. And there, if we're... He said it's like the in Thailand they keep mourning doves because they have a very beautiful cry or a song, and he said, and of course they're prized birds and pets that are looked after and cared for, and they are. When one is very proud of them, shows them off to one's friends, and we think that they're really wonderful, and you really try to look after them really well. I said, but they're still in the cage, and nobody asks the mourning doves whether they like being in that cage or not, and they're and of course, if they had the preference, they probably prefer not to be there. So that just that kind of recollection, reflection of how we create cages for ourselves, and whether it's a cage of wealth, if we have wealth and material comfort, it's still a cage. Or if we're experience some kind of poverty and lack, we're still in that cage of birth, aging, sickness, and death. We still suffer. We suffer because we suffer because we think we don't have, or we say the cage of intelligence and education. We can go out and be educated and have all sorts of knowledge, but we're still bound by the cage of our knowledge and our intelligence, or we don't have, we lack knowledge, education, or we think we lack it. And we suffer because of that. Ajahn Chah in particular is a great example of someone who did not, he born and grew up in a small village in rural northeast Thailand, very poor, looking at it through the lens of most people, very disadvantaged. No real access to education. He managed to get one grade. He passed grade 1 of his public education. But I would say he was not. He did not create a cage for himself of a lack of education or knowledge. And oftentimes he would say that, any science, any knowledge is incomplete if it doesn't have the knowledge of Dhamma, the truth of the Buddha's teachings. It's incomplete, insufficient, not able to actually give one the tools to live a skillful human life. So that this sense of paying attention to what kind of cage we either create for ourselves, or we volunteer for, or we seek out and try to get for ourselves, thinking it's something desirable, but this sense of being in the cage of birth, aging, sickness, and death, and this is one needs to be willing to look for the knowledge, understanding, and experience that will take one out of that cage. And it's not that, say, there's I'm thinking of the Buddha's exchange with, there's a sutta where Rohitassa is somebody who tried to find, say, the liberation through walking to the end of the world, and he had psychic powers, so he could. He was what was called a skywalker, and he could make great distances. And he never came to. He said he died before he found the end of the world, and he was asking the Buddha about it. And this is the Buddha's saying, well, the end of the world, and sort of the end of being in a cage, is just in this fathom-long body with its perceptions and its thoughts. To be able to understand the human condition and the human mind, to be liberated from the attachment, clinging, misunderstandings, misapprehensions that we're prone to, and it's just in this present moment, in this. So that Ajahn Chah was someone who came back to that kind of understanding, or that kind of emphasis, sort of over and over again. That learning how to be free from the world without being entangled in the world. And that there was one time. When when Ajahn Chah received a royal title, Chao Kun title, Prapodianten, he when he came back from Bangkok and from receiving this title, was a huge kind of gathering to receive him, and of course people were very excited and had a lot of kind of appreciation, respect. They had for him already, but it was sort of even more the sense of kind of delight and that say that the monk teacher who they cherish was being acknowledged. And in the talk that he gave, he talked about that whether one gains recognition or acknowledgement or say titles or positions of say respect or authority, for somebody practicing the Dhamma, the mind shouldn't be shaken. Or if there's tremendous gain, or there is a loss in some way, the mind shouldn't be shaken. Or if there is some kind of honor and respect given, or one is faced with some kind of criticism or slander, the mind shouldn't be shaken. He said it, and he said it's like in the area where Ajahn Chah lived, where I lived as well. I mean, there was for the longest time there's a big river there. It's a tributary of the Mekong, and it drains a large part of the northeast of Thailand, and comes from say the southern part of the northeast, as well as the part of the northern areas of the northeast, and then these two rivers meet, and it's called the Moon River, and it's quite a big river. And then as rivers in Thailand and in Southeast Asia, they go up and down tremendously depending on the season, because of the monsoon season. A lot of rain comes, and then over a period of several months, and the river will rise along. He said it so that somebody who is living with Dhamma, they are like the bridge. And in those days there was only one bridge across the Moon River going into Ubon city. And he said the mind is like the bridge going over the Moon River. He said that even though the river goes up and it goes down, the bridge stays the same. And so that sense of that image of stability and steadiness, and so that in practicing Dhamma, relying on these qualities of reflection and understanding and clarity, so that one it's not that one doesn't feel anything or doesn't recognize anything or doesn't see the river go up and down. means that one just doesn't go up and down with it. And so that was something that, say, another aspect of Ajahn Chah's character or temperament, qualities. He was incredibly observant and paid attention to the things going on around him, paid attention to the nature of circumstances, and just like that, whereas, just something simple. Everybody sees the river going up and down and the bridge going over it, but not many people would think of it to think of it as a Dhamma lesson. Ajahn Chah had that because this reflective mind that's kind of investigating and curious as well, and that's a really good example for us in terms of not being just kind of if I just sit here with my in a cross-legged position with my eyes closed, and somehow enlightenment's going to dawn on me. No, you've got to pay attention. You've got to reflect. You've got to investigate. And Ajahn Chah was a great example of that. Or just even things that were like one time I was walking with Ajahn Chah. We were in the forest. We might have been coming back from the nun section, and it was just him and I, and we're walking along one of the paths, and the paths are nicely swept through the forest, and something fell from the trees, right sort of close to us, next to us, and fell on the path. Anyway, it was two lizards that were copulating and fell out of a tree, and Ajahn Chah, look at that. He said, you see what happened? I bet they didn't think they were going to fall out of the tree. He said, but they're completely, they were that engrossed in happiness and pleasure seeking. He said, that's what happens in the human condition. That's what happens in life. We get swept up by these experiences, and even if it's pleasurable, if you don't pay attention, bad things happen. You end up hurt, and so it was just taking something that happens nearby and spontaneously, and then turning it into a Dhamma teaching, and that's something also that we can be. Not teaching ourselves, because that's so important that we know how to teach ourselves, and that of course there's one of the books, collections of Ajahn Chah's teachings was actually titled "Everything is Teaching Us," and that's a Ajahn Chah's perspective on Dhamma and on the world around. Is that it's not something that we need to be running away from or running towards and trying to acquire or accumulate, but turning it in the way that it's teaching us, that we are learning from our experience, and Ajahn Chah was a master at doing that for himself, reflecting, investigating on his experience, but then also teaching. That was one of the reasons why he was such a great teacher. Maybe the last thing I'll talk about is he was a great teacher, but it wasn't just because he was, say, clever, intelligent at using language or using similes, which he was, but so much of his teaching was his example, his living of the Dhamma, and in particular, tremendous unselfishness, and that's kind of the disease of the human heart, is this all the kind of worries and fears and biases and preferences and attachments and clinging that all come from the sense of self, and trying to either gratify self or prop up self or have self competing with other. All of that is there is a self program that keeps cranking out dukkha. And being able to live in a way where one is not, that self-cherishing is just not there. And it doesn't mean that one is some sort of blank automaton. It means that one is really present to live one's life for one's own benefit and for the benefit of others. One is able to respond with wisdom and compassion because this tremendous unselfishness, and he never asked us to do anything or practice in any way that he himself hadn't done or wasn't doing. He was that was a kind of a hallmark of his teaching, was that he taught by example, and the things of, and he was much more concerned with what accords with Dhamma as opposed to what accords with either his own preferences or the preferences of the world. I think of as he got older, his health, wasn't great. It was kind of declining, and he, but then, say, as his health was declining, then more and more people were concerned for his well-being and coming to pay respects or coming to offer some medicine or to make some offering to do something, and he would always receive people, and oftentimes when he meet with people, he would, of course, he would be very gracious and and he would give people teachings and advice and whatever. that was appropriate. But then oftentimes, and sometimes, and I was his attendant at sometimes, and you could see that sometimes, he would, it would really take its toll, and he would need to go back and rest or to be, and we'd try to protect him, but he was, no, people have come from a long way to with an interest in Dhamma and out of there. And he wanted to receive them. Although, sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't make it easy on people. I can remember one time going with him, and he did this quite a few times. He'd say, I take a chair, and we go out to the front of the monastery, new part of the monastery. It was shady enough there. It was an old mango orchard, but there was a lot of gravel. And I said, well, I'll receive people out here. I said, they won't want to sit very long. But he still was. You still would want to receive and be gracious. And that, so that kind of unselfishness, and it's not. You realize that it's not just a manifestation of, say, like the fruit of practice. It is kind of part and parcel of the practice. One has to integrate that in one's practice, in one's training, reflect on how that sense of self keeps coming up, and the fears or worries or kind of preferences and trying to get things my way, or how I would like it, and how unsatisfying that is, and just being able to give oneself to the practice, give oneself to the Dhamma. And of course, Ajahn Chah was a stellar example of that, and of course, that's one of the reasons why we still remember him, and his influence is such that there's well over 300 monasteries in Thailand, and probably 20 or 30 in the West, and who knows how many lay people all around, whether it's in Thailand or in other places in the world that are have a appreciation of his teaching, of his example, of his ways of pointing to the Dhamma. So I'll offer that for reflection this evening.